Alright, hello. Just wanted to quickly make a quick video before we get into this video, real quick, that I don't go fully in depth on each guy I talk about. Um, so for instance, right now I'm working on a really big documentary on Joachim Peiper, his full life and death, like completely from start to finish. Just finished the book again by Danny Parker, the Joachim Peiper book. It's really good. Goes in proper detail about his death, many different interviews, kind of conspiracies too. It's quite interesting. So I'm currently working on that. So I don't want to hear comments that I haven't gone too much into it. I have gone into it, but not, fully. Um, so yeah, and also there was something else as well I need to talk about is the issue on YouTube with AI. So at the moment, AI on YouTube is becoming, pretty unprecedented at the moment. It's very bad. My content is being stolen terribly. Tons of other YouTubers are having the same issue. I'm pretty much having to put out massive amounts of copyrights pretty much all the time now because of this issue. Um, it seems to me that I cannot find any much real content on here anymore with World War II. It seems to me that most of it's all fake. Um, the information is fake, obviously some mistakes, but pretty much tons of these videos now, it's all fake. And people like myself put hours into making videos. Hours and hours of content goes into making these videos, um, and these channels you find can pretty much make a video of like 10 videos in a day, can upload like 5 videos a day even, and it's pretty much because of their mass AI made. You can tell by AI generated footage, and this pretty much is affecting so much YouTubers, and it isn't even YouTubers actually, like, isn't even history YouTubers, sorry, it's aviation, it's, anything to do with kind of the similar niche, all types of war, even. I've spoken to quite a few bigger YouTubers about this as well, and it's going to a point where YouTube don't care about it. They're not doing anything to crack down on it, and it's really affecting real YouTubers, real people. Now, I need to come on camera more now to show YouTube that I'm real, because I need to show my face to kind of show that I am a real person, so YouTube can stop classing me as fake or not real. Because these channels that you see on here literally aren't owned by people. Like, they're probably owned by someone in India, like mass producing these fake channels. Like, I've seen how these things are made. There's literally people that talk about how you make them. Um, and many of them are outsourced globally. Like, there's a British history channel that isn't owned by anyone who's British. They're owned by people that I think it was like Vietnam or the Philippines or something like that. And I think this is becoming a serious issue, you know. And hopefully soon YouTube can seriously do something about it, because it's just going to drive people away. And before you know it, real people with real history passion won't be on here anymore, because our content is being buried by people who just make these tens of videos a day, mass producing fakes, so definitely is causing some serious damage to YouTube, which I don't know how long this will last. But anyway, so what I'm saying quickly before we get in the video, so make sure you support your real YouTubers. Anybody who you watch is real. Make sure you support them. And when you do come across these AI channels, these mass made channels, just ignore them. Like, I think it's time now where we kind of fight back against them almost, because they're just multiplying, and YouTube is doing nothing about it, And the thing is, I'm not totally against AI. AI is a phenomenal tool. I think AI can be very helpful with some things as well, especially for myself when I'm working on my own. Sometimes I need some help with things. AI can be phenomenal, but with these things, like, it's full on generated content, which is crazy, especially for,
When Allied forces finally secured victory in 1945, the enormous apparatus that sustained the Third Reich began its rapid disintegration. The SS, once among the most formidable organizations within the Nazi state, suddenly found its members scattered across a devastated continent. Their futures varied dramatically. Some were apprehended within weeks and faced immediate justice. Others vanished into the chaos of post-war Europe, maintaining false identities for years or even decades. A smaller number managed to blend back into civilian life, carrying secrets that would haunt them until death. The collapse of Nazi Germany didn't automatically mean accountability for those who'd committed atrocities. In fact, the fall of the regime launched what would become a decades-long effort, spanning continents and involving multiple intelligence agencies, from the landmark proceedings at Nuremberg to covert operations in South American capitals and Middle Eastern cities. The pursuit stretched across more than 70 years. This is the story of how the architects and executors of Nazi policies were hunted down and what ultimately became of them. By late 1944, battlefield realities had become impossible to ignore. Both Allied and Axis leadership understood that Germany's military position was deteriorating beyond repair. What had been a powerful regime just years earlier was now fragmenting from within. As British and American forces pushed eastward through France, Soviet armies launched their final offensive from the opposite direction. By early 1945, they were approaching Berlin itself. Senior officials cycled through the Führer's underground bunker, unable to devise any effective strategy to reverse Germany's catastrophic military situation. Berlin, the symbolic heart of power, became the focal point of the final battle. Deep in his fortified bunker, leadership increasingly lost touch with reality. Above ground, civilians faced catastrophic conditions. Food supplies dwindled, infrastructure lay in ruins, and most either sought shelter underground or fled toward rural areas. On May 2nd, when Berlin was already completely besieged, Soviet soldiers took the Reichstag building and raised the red flag at its top. Though Berlin's fall was imminent, fighting continued in scattered locations for several more days. Finally, on May 7th, Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz signed the unconditional surrender that officially ended the European war. Peace didn't arrive immediately. At that moment, Allied forces initiated an intensive campaign to locate and apprehend regime officials who were attempting to disappear and escape as far from Germany as possible. Josef Sepp Dietrich represented one of the most prominent figures within the Waffen-SS who survived the war. Born in Bavaria in 1892, he served in World War I before joining the early party movement in the 1920s. His loyalty and early association earned him rapid advancement. By the time war broke out, he commanded the Leibstandarte, the elite bodyguard regiment that eventually expanded into a full division. Dietrich participated in major campaigns across Poland, France, the Balkans, and the Eastern Front. His units gained a reputation for aggressive tactics and battlefield effectiveness, but also for documented incidents against prisoners and civilians. His most controversial role came during the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, when his 6th Panzer Army spearheaded the offensive through the Ardennes. It was during this operation that the Malmedy massacre occurred, an event that would haunt several of his subordinates and eventually Dietrich himself. When the war ended, American forces captured Dietrich in Austria. Unlike many SS officers who attempted to flee or hide, he surrendered with the expectation that his status as a military commander might afford him some protection. He was mistaken. In 1946, Dietrich faced trial at Dachau for his connection to the Malmedy massacre, where 84 American prisoners of war had been executed by troops under his command. Though he hadn't personally ordered or participated in the killings, as the commanding officer of the 6th Panzer Army, prosecutors held him responsible for the actions of his subordinates. He received a 25-year sentence. However, the sentence proved controversial. Many American military officials argued that Dietrich was being held accountable for the broader crimes of his organization rather than specific actions he'd ordered. By the early 1950s, as Cold War tensions escalated and West Germany became a crucial ally, pressure mounted for clemency. In 1955, after serving less than 10 years, Dietrich was released from Landsberg Prison, but his freedom proved temporary. West German authorities immediately rearrested him to face trial for his involvement in the 1934 purge known as the Night of the Long Knives, where he'd personally participated in executions on orders. This trial resulted in an 18-month sentence, which he served at Landsberg once again. Released in 1959, Dietrich lived quietly in Ludwigsburg until his death from a heart attack in 1966 at age 74. Despite his war crimes convictions, over 6,000 former Waffen-SS members attended his funeral, a testament to the loyalty he still commanded among veterans and the complex legacy of Waffen-SS commanders in post-war Germany. Kurt Meyer, known by the nickname Panzer Meyer, commanded the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend during the Normandy campaign. Born in 1910, Meyer joined the SS in 1931 and rose through the ranks of the Leibstandarte. His aggressive leadership style and tactical skill earned him rapid promotion, and by 1944, at just 33 years old, he became the youngest divisional commander in the German armed forces. Meyer's division, composed largely of teenage volunteers from the Hitler Youth Organization, fought with fanatical determination during the defense of Normandy. However, troops under his command were implicated in several incidents involving the execution of Canadian prisoners of war, most notably at the Ardennes Abbey on June 7th to 8th, 1944, where at least 20 Canadian soldiers were killed after surrendering. When the war ended, Meyer initially evaded capture by disguising himself and working as a laborer in occupied Germany. However, Belgian authorities eventually identified him, and he was arrested in 1945. Canadian military authorities demanded his extradition to face trial for war crimes committed against their forces in Normandy. His trial took place in December 1945 in Aurich, Germany. Meyer denied ordering the execution of prisoners, claiming he'd been away from his headquarters when the killings occurred. However, testimony from witnesses and circumstantial evidence suggested that, at minimum, he'd created an atmosphere within his division where such actions were tolerated or even encouraged. The court found him guilty and sentenced him to death by firing squad. However, the sentence sparked controversy. Some argued that Meyer was being made an example of, while battlefield conditions and the age of his soldiers, many just 17 or 18 years old, complicated questions of command responsibility. In January 1946, the sentence was commuted to life imprisonment. Meyer was transferred to Dorchester Penitentiary in New Brunswick, Canada, where he remained until 1951. That year, he was moved back to Germany and held at Wörl Prison. Growing sentiment in West Germany for the release of convicted war criminals, combined with Cold War politics, led to his early release in 1954, having served less than 9 years. After his release, Meyer became active in veterans organizations and helped establish HIAG, Hilfsgemeinschaft auf Gegenseitigkeit der Angehörigen der ehemaligen Waffen-SS, a mutual aid organization for former Waffen-SS members. He published his memoirs, Grenadiers, which presented a sanitized version of his wartime service and became popular among former soldiers. Meyer lived relatively openly in Hagen, West Germany, where he worked in sales for a brewery. He maintained contact with numerous former Waffen-SS members and continued to defend the organization's reputation until his death from a heart attack in 1961 at age 51. His funeral, like Dietrich's, attracted hundreds of former comrades, highlighting the persistent bonds among Waffen-SS veterans. Perhaps no Waffen-SS officer's post-war life proved more complicated or ended more mysteriously than that of Joachim Peiper. Born in Berlin in 1915 to a middle-class family, Peiper joined the SS in 1934 and quickly caught the attention of Heinrich Himmler himself, serving as one of his personal adjutants before the war. When combat operations began, Peiper transferred to the Leibstandarte, where his aggressive tactics and tactical brilliance earned him rapid promotion. By 1944, at age 29, he commanded Kampfgruppe Peiper, a battle group built around the 1st SS Panzer Regiment. He became one of the most highly decorated German officers, receiving the Knight's Cross with oak leaves and swords. Peiper's units fought across multiple fronts: Poland, France, the Balkans, and most extensively on the Eastern Front, where German forces engaged in a particularly brutal campaign. His battle group gained a fearsome reputation for speed and aggression, often spearheading major offensive operations. However, this aggressive combat style came with documented incidents of violence against civilians and prisoners. The event that would define Peiper's post-war existence occurred during the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944. Kampfgruppe Peiper led the offensive thrust through the Ardennes, and on December 17, 1944, near the Belgian town of Malmedy, approximately 84 American prisoners of war were executed in a snow-covered field. This became known as the Malmedy Massacre, though similar incidents occurred at other locations along Peiper's route of advance. The circumstances remained disputed. Some argued that a breakdown in command and control during the chaotic offensive led to the killings without Peiper's direct knowledge or orders. Others maintained that his leadership style and previous incidents suggested at minimum a tolerance for such actions. What remained undisputed was that the executions occurred under his command. When Germany surrendered, Peiper was already imprisoned. He'd been captured by American forces in Austria in May 1945. American authorities immediately identified him as a key figure in the Malmedy massacre and included him among the defendants in the subsequent trial. The Malmedy trial, which began in May 1946 at Dachau, proved controversial from the start. Of the 73 defendants, Peiper was among the most prominent. Prosecutors argued that he bore command responsibility for the massacre and that his aggressive tactical doctrine created conditions where such atrocities occurred. Maintained that he neither ordered nor knew about the killings until after they occurred, arguing that battlefield chaos and the breakdown of communications during the offensive meant he couldn't control all actions of his dispersed units. In July 1946, the court found Peiper and many of his subordinates guilty. Peiper received a death sentence. However, the proceedings faced almost immediate scrutiny. Questions arose about interrogation methods used by American investigators, with some defendants claiming they'd been subjected to mock trials and physical intimidation to extract confessions. These allegations, though disputed, provided grounds for appeals. As appeals proceeded through military courts, the sentences of many defendants, including Peiper, were repeatedly reviewed. By 1951, growing Cold War tensions and West Germany's emerging importance as an ally shifted political calculations. Death sentences were commuted, and in Peiper's case, his sentence was eventually reduced to life imprisonment. He remained incarcerated at Landsberg Prison, the same facility where several other prominent SS officers served time. Within the prison, Peiper occupied his time learning languages. He became fluent in English, French, and Italian, and maintaining correspondence with former comrades and military historians. By the late 1950s, pressure for clemency intensified. Veterans organizations in Germany lobbied persistently for the release of imprisoned Waffen-SS members. In December 1956, after serving 11 years, Peiper was released on parole. His freedom proved challenging. Initially, he struggled to find employment. His notoriety made him unemployable in many sectors. Eventually, in 1957, Volkswagen offered him a position as a sales manager, partly through connections with former SS members who'd found positions in German industry. He worked for the automotive company through the 1960s, eventually serving in their translation department given his linguistic abilities. However, his past continually resurfaced. In 1964, East German authorities publicly identified him as a war criminal still living freely in West Germany, using this as propaganda to criticize the Western government's lenient treatment of former SS personnel. The publicity forced Volkswagen to dismiss him in 1966, as the company feared the association would damage their international reputation, particularly in the American market. Unemployed and facing persistent public attention, Peiper made a fateful decision. In 1972, he purchased a small, isolated house in the tiny village of Travis in eastern France, near the Swiss border. The house, which locals called l'Hermitage, sat at the end of a long dirt road surrounded by forest, providing the seclusion he desperately sought. For several years, Peiper lived quietly in Traves, working as a translator from home. He maintained minimal contact with villagers, though he did develop a cordial relationship with the local priest, Father Desbois, and occasionally visited the village bar. Most residents knew little about his background, though his German accent and military bearing made him notable in the small French community. This quiet existence ended in 1976 when a French communist newspaper, L'Humanité, published an article revealing that Joachim Peiper, the convicted war criminal from the Malmedy massacre, was living in Traves. The article called for his expulsion from France. The revelation shocked the village and created immediate tension. Some residents demanded he leave, while others argued he'd lived peacefully among them and should be left alone. French veterans groups, particularly those with communist affiliations, organized protests demanding his deportation. Peiper received anonymous threatening letters and phone calls. On several occasions, activists from Paris traveled to Traves to demonstrate outside his property. Despite this, French authorities took no action to remove him. Legally, he'd served his sentence and had the right to reside in France. The situation escalated through 1976. Peiper, aware of the mounting hostility, reportedly told acquaintances he expected violence. He purchased weapons for self-defense and reinforced his home's windows and doors. In conversations with Father Desbois, the village priest, he expressed a kind of resignation about his fate, suggesting he knew the threats would eventually materialize into something concrete. On the night of July 13th to 14th, 1976, Bastille Day in France, Peiper's house was attacked. Around 3 a.m., assailants approached the isolated property and set it ablaze, likely using gasoline or another accelerant. The wooden structure burned rapidly and intensely. When firefighters finally reached the remote location and extinguished the flames, they discovered a charred body inside, later identified through dental records. He was 61 years old. An investigation followed, but it yielded few concrete results. The official conclusion stated that Peiper had died in the fire, but circumstances strongly suggested arson and murder. Weapons registered to Peiper were found in the ruins, and some forensic evidence indicated he'd attempted to defend himself, though the extensive fire damage made definitive conclusions nearly impossible. No one was ever charged with the killing. French authorities investigated several leads, including communist activist groups and former resistance members who might have sought revenge, but insufficient evidence prevented any prosecutions. The case officially remains unsolved to this day, though most historians accept that Peiper was murdered in a revenge killing related to his wartime activities. However, conspiracy theories emerged almost immediately and persist even now, particularly among former SS comrades and certain circles in Germany. Some argued that Peiper had faked his own death and escaped, similar to rumors that surrounded other prominent figures. They pointed to several supposed anomalies. The body was severely burned, making positive identification difficult despite the dental records. Peiper had maintained connections to networks of former SS members who could theoretically have facilitated an escape, and the timing, Bastille Day celebrations, would have provided cover and distraction for his departure from the area. The most intriguing and often cited support for this theory came from Father Desbois, the local priest who had befriended Peiper during his years in Traves. In interviews conducted years after the incident, Father Desbois expressed significant doubts about the official narrative of Peiper's death. He noted that in their final conversation, which occurred just a few days before the fire, it seemed unusually calm and almost serene, an attitude the priest found inconsistent with someone who was supposedly in fear for his life and expecting imminent violence. Father Desbois mentioned in one interview that Peiper had told him, "What will happen, with a sense of acceptance that struck the priest as odd. Additionally, Father Desbois pointed out that certain personal effects that Peiper had valued highly, including some books, personal documents and photographs, were never found in the ruins of the house. This suggested to the priest that they might have been removed before the fire, though he acknowledged this was merely speculation on his part. Some villagers reported seeing unfamiliar vehicles in the area on the night of the fire, cars that didn't belong to any local residents. There were also unconfirmed reports from fishermen of unusual activity near a small lake a few kilometers from Traves around dawn on July 14th, including what might have been a boat departing. These details, though never verified, fueled ongoing speculation that Peiper's death had been staged and that he'd escaped to South America or elsewhere with assistance from former comrades who still maintained underground networks. Additional fuel for the conspiracy came from the fact that some of Peiper's former SS colleagues reportedly received letters postmarked from South America in the years following 1976, though the authorship was never confirmed. Veterans groups in Germany whispered about sightings in Argentina and Paraguay, though none were ever substantiated. However, most historians and investigators dismissed these theories as wishful thinking by sympathizers who couldn't accept Peiper's violent end. The forensic evidence, despite the fire damage, was consistent with Peiper's death in the blaze. The dental records matched conclusively. Moreover, there were no credible, verified sightings of him after July 1976, and the logistical complexity of staging such an elaborate escape seemed implausible given the circumstances. The priest's doubts, while interesting and frequently cited, likely reflected his personal attachment to Peiper and the natural human difficulty in accepting that someone he'd known could meet such a violent end. Father Desbois himself acknowledged in later interviews that he had no actual evidence of survival, only a feeling that something about the official story didn't sit right with him. What cannot be disputed is that the mystery surrounding Peiper's death became symbolic of the complicated and unresolved legacies of Waffen-SS officers in post-war Europe. Some viewed his killing, assuming it was indeed murder, as justified retribution for unpunished wartime crimes, a form of delayed justice that official channels had failed to deliver. Others saw it as vigilante violence that circumvented legal processes and set a dangerous precedent. The persistent possibility of escape, however remote and unlikely, kept his name circulating in veteran circles and conspiracy communities for decades afterward. The unanswered questions surrounding that night in Traves: who exactly set the fire? Was it organized or spontaneous? Did Peiper truly die, or did he somehow escape? Ensured that Joachim Peiper's story didn't end cleanly with a confirmed death, but rather faded into ambiguity and speculation. For some, this ambiguity was frustrating. For others, particularly those who'd served under him, it offered a strange kind of hope that perhaps justice had not been served after all. What remains historically certain is that Joachim Peiper's life trajectory, from decorated combat commander to convicted war criminal to isolated exile to violent death or disappearance, perfectly illustrated the impossible position many Waffen-SS commanders found themselves in after 1945. Unlike administrative SS personnel directly involved in running concentration camps, whose guilt was unambiguous, Waffen-SS commanders occupied a grey area between military service and war crimes, making their prosecution, post-war treatment, and ultimate fates subject to ongoing debate, and, in Peiper's case, enduring mystery. While concentration camp administrators and many combat commanders faced prosecution, some SS officers managed to avoid serious consequences due to the specific nature of their wartime activities and, quite frankly, sheer audacity. Otto Skorzeny represented perhaps the most successful case of an SS officer who not only avoided punishment, but became something of an international celebrity and mystery man in the post-war world. Born in Vienna in 1908, Skorzeny joined the SS in 1931. His engineering background led to assignments in technical services, but his imposing physical presence, he stood 6 feet 4 inches with a prominent dueling scar across his left cheek, and his initiative caught the attention of superiors. By 1943, he commanded special operations units, essentially becoming the regime's go-to man for impossible missions. Skorzeny became internationally famous for his daring rescue of Mussolini in September 1943. After Italian authorities arrested the deposed dictator and held him at a mountain resort in Gran Sasso, Skorzeny led a glider-borne commando raid that extracted Mussolini without firing a shot. The operation, though strategically insignificant in the broader context of the war, became a propaganda triumph and earned Skorzeny the Knight's Cross, personally presented by the Führer himself. His subsequent operations included leading sabotage missions during the Battle of the Bulge, where German soldiers wearing American uniforms and speaking English infiltrated Allied lines to create confusion, misdirect troops, and conduct reconnaissance. This operation, Operation Greif, violated conventions of war regarding combatants in enemy uniforms, technically making Skorzeny a war criminal under international law. When Germany surrendered, Skorzeny was captured by American forces in Austria. Unlike many SS officers who tried to hide or flee, he was relatively well known due to his commando exploits, which had been publicized during the war. He faced trial not for Holocaust participation or concentration camp activities, but specifically for the false flag operations during the Bulge offensive. In 1947, a military tribunal at Dachau tried him for ordering soldiers to fight in enemy uniforms, which constituted a violation of the laws of war. The prosecution seemed straightforward. Skorzeny had clearly organized and led Operation Greif, and combatants wearing enemy uniforms could be executed as spies under international law. The trial, however, produced an entirely unexpected outcome. A British officer, a former Special Operations Executive SOE Commando, testified that Allied forces had routinely used similar tactics throughout the war, including British commandos operating behind enemy lines while wearing German uniforms. This testimony completely undermined the prosecution's case by suggesting that such operations, while questionable, weren't unprecedented and had been employed by both sides. In September 1947, the court acquitted Skorzeny of all charges. The verdict shocked prosecutors, but delighted Skorzeny, who had conducted his own defense with considerable skill and charm, impressing even his captors with his intelligence and wit. However, he didn't walk free immediately. He remained in detention at a civilian internment camp as a witness in other proceedings, and because he was still classified as a potential security risk. The camp, Darmstadt internment facility, held numerous former SS officers awaiting denazification proceedings. In July 1948, while still held at Darmstadt, Skorzeny executed perhaps his most audacious operation, escaping from Allied custody. 3 former SS officers, still operating in the chaotic post-war environment, aided his escape. According to various accounts, they arrived at the camp wearing American military police uniforms, presented forged transfer papers, and simply walked out with Skorzeny. The brazen escape wasn't discovered for hours. Skorzeny fled first to France, where underground networks of former SS members provided safe houses and false documents. From France, he made his way to Spain, where Franco's government, sympathetic to those who'd fought against communism, provided safe haven. Franco's Spain became a refuge for numerous former SS and other fugitives, and Skorzeny settled there comfortably. In Madrid, Skorzeny didn't hide or live under an assumed name. Instead, he lived quite openly under his own identity and established a legitimate business, a construction and engineering firm that proved quite successful. However, this business also served as cover for other activities that made Skorzeny one of the most intriguing figures of the Cold War era. Evidence and testimonies suggest that Skorzeny worked with various intelligence services during the 1950s and 1960s. He allegedly maintained contacts with both Western intelligence agencies, including elements of the CIA and West German intelligence, and possibly even Soviet contacts. His engineering firm provided perfect cover for traveling internationally, and his wartime expertise in special operations made him valuable to intelligence services seeking deniable operatives. More controversially, Skorzeny allegedly helped establish and maintain escape routes for former SS officers seeking to leave Europe for South America and the Middle East. He became a central node in networks of former SS members, using his connections, resources, and international mobility to assist others in evading prosecution or starting new lives abroad. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s, Skorzeny lived an extraordinarily comfortable and public life that contrasted sharply with the fates of other SS officers. While commandants faced execution and combat leaders served long prison terms, Skorzeny attended parties in Madrid's social circles, ran multiple businesses, traveled internationally on legitimate passports, and cultivated his image as a daring commando rather than a convicted criminal. He even worked briefly as a technical advisor on several films depicting World War II operations, including providing consultation on commando tactics and special operations for Hollywood productions. This celebrity status seemed almost surreal given his SS membership and wartime activities. Skorzeny also maintained close relationships with various right-wing and neo-fascist movements across Europe and Latin America, though he was careful never to explicitly endorse political violence or illegal activities in ways that would threaten his comfortable existence in Spain. In the 1970s, some investigators suggested Skorzeny had connections to various mercenary activities and arms-dealing operations, though nothing was ever conclusively proven. His networks of former SS contacts, combined with his intelligence connections and legitimate business operations, created a complex web that made it difficult to determine where legal activities ended and illegal ones began. Skorzeny died in Madrid on July 5, 1975, at age 67 from lung cancer. He had never faced meaningful consequences for his SS membership or wartime actions beyond his brief imprisonment and trial, from which he'd been acquitted. His death came peacefully in a hospital, surrounded by family, a stark contrast to the violent ends met by many of his contemporaries. His funeral in Madrid attracted former SS comrades from across Europe, demonstrating that the networks persisted decades after the regime's fall. Among those in attendance were former Waffen-SS officers, intelligence operatives, and businessmen, all part of the parallel society that former SS members had constructed in the post-war world. Skorzeny's comfortable post-war existence highlighted a troubling reality. The nature of one's wartime activities and the evidence available for prosecution dramatically affected post-war outcomes. Commandos and special operations personnel, whose crimes were harder to document and who possessed skills valuable in the Cold War environment, often fared far better than concentration camp guards or administrators whose crimes were thoroughly documented and whose skills had no peacetime value. Wilhelm Mohnke represented a different category of Waffen-SS survivor, those who ended up in Soviet custody and whose fates remained mysterious for decades. Born in 1911, Mohnke joined the SS in 1933 and served in the Leibstandarte throughout the war, rising to command the division by 1945. Mohnke's units were implicated in several massacres of prisoners, including British soldiers at Wormhut in 1940, where approximately 80 captured troops were executed. Despite evidence of his unit's involvement, Mohnke's direct role remained disputed, with subordinates claiming they'd acted without his knowledge or orders, a common defense among SS commanders. In the final days of the war, Mohnke commanded the defense of the government district in Berlin, making him one of the last people to see the Führer alive. On May 2, 1945, after the suicide, Mohnke led a breakout attempt from the bunker complex with other survivors. Soviet forces captured him shortly afterward. Unlike SS officers captured by Western allies, Mohnke disappeared into the Soviet prison system. The Soviets, who'd suffered enormous casualties fighting German forces, showed little interest in legal niceties or due process for captured SS personnel. Mohnke spent the next decade in various Soviet labor camps and prisons, his whereabouts unknown to Western authorities or his family. In 1955, as part of a broader prisoner release following Stalin's death and improving Soviet-German relations, Mohnke was repatriated to West Germany. His return surprised many who'd assumed he'd died in Soviet custody. British and Canadian authorities, aware of his potential involvement in the Wormhut massacre and other incidents, sought to prosecute him. However, the evidence proved problematic. Many potential witnesses had died during the war, Soviet captivity had left document trails incomplete, and Mohnke maintained he'd neither ordered nor known about the executions. Despite multiple investigations by British and German authorities spanning several decades, prosecutors never gathered sufficient evidence to bring charges. Mohnke lived quietly in Hamburg, refusing most interview requests and maintaining a low profile until his death in 2001 at age 90. His case illustrated how Soviet captivity could actually shield SS officers from Western prosecution. The decade-long gap in documentation and the difficulty of gathering evidence years after events made successful prosecution nearly impossible. For some lower-ranking members within the regime, their capture wasn't a priority immediately after the war, because resources focused on more prominent figures. Theodor Peter Johann Wisch was born on December 13, 1907, in Wesselbürener Kug, a small town in Holstein, Germany. He joined the SS in 1930, becoming member number 4759, and was assigned to the Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler. This unit began as a bodyguard formation, but would evolve into one of the premier combat divisions of the Waffen-SS. Wisch remained with the Leibstandarte throughout his entire military career, a rarity among officers who often transferred between units. He started as a platoon leader and rose through the ranks steadily, company commander, battalion commander, and eventually regimental commander. His progression reflected both his tactical competence and his reliability in the eyes of his superiors. When Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, Wisch commanded a company within the Leibstandarte. The unit saw action during the campaign, though the fighting in Poland was relatively brief. The 1940 campaign in France provided more significant combat experience. Wisch, now commanding a battalion, participated in the breakthrough operations that led to the rapid defeat of French and British forces. The invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941 marked the beginning of the most brutal phase of the war. Wisch's battalion fought in the initial advances through Ukraine and toward Rostov. The fighting on the Eastern Front proved far more costly than earlier campaigns. Casualties mounted as German forces encountered fierce Soviet resistance and harsh environmental conditions. During the winter of 1941-42, German forces faced their first major setback when Soviet counteroffensives pushed them back from Moscow. Wisch's battalion was involved in desperate defensive fighting during this period. The experience of that first Russian winter marked all who survived it. The extreme cold, supply shortages, and relentless Soviet attacks created conditions unlike anything German forces had previously encountered. By 1942, Wisch had been promoted to command a regiment within the Leibstandarte. He led this regiment through continued operations on the Eastern Front, including participation in the summer offensive toward the Caucasus oil fields. In early 1943, his regiment fought in the Third Battle of Kharkov, where German forces successfully recaptured the city in a major counter-offensive. Wisch's performance during these campaigns earned him the Knight's Cross on September 15, 1941, followed by the Oak Leaves on February 12, 1944. These decorations recognized his abilities as a combat commander and his regiment's effectiveness in difficult fighting conditions. In July 1943, the Leibstandarte participated in Operation Citadel, the German offensive at Kursk. This massive battle involved thousands of tanks and represented Germany's last major strategic offensive on the Eastern Front. Wisch's regiment was part of the armoured thrust attempting to break through Soviet defences. The offensive failed, marking a turning point in the war. Following Kursk, the Leibstandarte was withdrawn from the Eastern Front and sent to Italy in September 1943. The division participated in operations following Italy's surrender and armistice with the Allies. In April 1943, Wisch was promoted to command the entire 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler, taking over from Josef Sepp Dietrich. At age 35, he took charge of one of the elite formations in German service. When Allied forces landed in Normandy on June 6, 1944, the Leibstandarte was positioned in Belgium. Wisch's division was ordered to move to Normandy and counterattack the invading forces. However, Allied air superiority severely hampered movement. Constant air attacks caused casualties and delays before his division even reached the front lines. Throughout June and July 1944, Wisch commanded his division in the defensive battles around Caen. The fighting proved extremely costly. Allied numerical and material superiority, combined with devastating air and naval gunfire support, gradually wore down German forces. Wisch's division suffered heavy casualties, but maintained cohesion better than many other German units. By mid-August 1944, German forces in Normandy faced encirclement in what became known as the Falaise Pocket. Allied forces threatened to trap the remnants of two German armies. Wisch commanded his division during the desperate fighting to keep escape routes open. On August 20th, 1944, near Falaise, Wisch was seriously wounded by naval artillery fire. The wounds were severe. He suffered injuries to both legs that would require extensive medical treatment. He received the swords to his Knight's Cross on August 30th, 1944, while recovering from these wounds. Wisch was evacuated from the front and transported to military hospitals in Germany. The wounds effectively ended his combat career. He spent the remainder of the war recovering in various medical facilities, undergoing multiple surgeries and lengthy rehabilitation. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, Wisch was still recovering from his wounds. American forces took control of the medical facility and Wisch became a prisoner of war. His physical condition was poor, the wounds had not fully healed, and he walked with difficulty. American authorities investigated Wisch's service record to determine whether he should face war crimes charges. The investigation found no direct evidence linking Wisch personally to war crimes. Without sufficient evidence to file charges, Wisch went through standard denazification proceedings. In 1948, after approximately 3 years in custody, Wisch was released. He returned to northern Germany and began rebuilding his life. He found employment and lived quietly, maintaining a low profile and avoiding public attention. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, Wisch worked steadily in civilian employment. Unlike some former Waffen-SS officers who became prominent in veterans organizations or published memoirs, Wisch largely stayed away from such activities. He attended occasional private reunions but avoided public events or media attention. Wisch's wounds from Normandy continued to affect him throughout his life. He walked with a permanent limp and suffered chronic pain from the injuries. Theodor Wisch died on January 11, 1995, in Hamburg-Norderstedt at the age of 87. He had lived nearly 50 years after the war ended. His death received minimal public notice, and he is buried in the Stadtfriedhof of Bas-Büttel. Paul Hausser occupied a unique position in Waffen-SS history. He was the organization's most senior field commander and the professional military officer most responsible for transforming it from a political militia into a conventional fighting force. Hausser was born on October 7, 1880, in Brandenburg an der Havel, making him nearly 3 decades older than most Waffen-SS commanders. He came from a Prussian military family and joined the Imperial German Army in 1892. He attended the Prussian Military Academy and graduated in 1899. Becoming a lieutenant in the 155th Infantry Regiment. During World War I, Hausser served as a staff officer, rising to the rank of major. He earned the Iron Cross First Class and gained extensive experience in military planning and operations. Unlike younger officers, whose only military experience was in the final years of that war, Hausser had served in the professional army of Imperial Germany at its peak. After Germany's defeat in 1918, Hausser continued his military career in the Reichswehr, the 100,000-man professional army permitted under the Treaty of Versailles. He held various command and staff positions throughout the 1920s, steadily advancing in rank. By 1932, he had reached the rank of General Lieutenant. In January 1932, at age 51, Hausser retired from active military service. However, retirement proved brief. In November 1934, Hausser was approached by the SS about joining the organization and helping to establish training programs for its armed units. The SS needed experienced professional officers to provide training and establish standards. Hausser joined the SS in November 1934 at age 54. He was given responsibility for establishing officer training schools for the SS Verfügungstruppe. Between 1935 and 1939, Hausser established the SS officers' schools at Bad Tölz and Braunschweig. These institutions trained the future officer corps of the Waffen-SS. When war began in September 1939, Hausser moved from training roles to field command. He took charge of the SS Verfügungsdivision, leading it during the invasion of France in May 1940. During fighting near Rotterdam on May 14, 1940, Hausser was seriously wounded. A shell fragment struck his face, destroying his right eye and causing severe facial injuries. Despite these serious injuries, Hausser returned to active duty. In October 1941, he took command of the SS division Das Reich on the Eastern Front. At age 61, Hausser commanded this division during the brutal winter of 1941-42. On January 14, 1942, during fighting near Josef, Hausser was wounded again, suffering additional facial injuries. After recovering, Hausser was promoted to command the 2nd SS Panzer Corps by late 1942. In early 1943, Hausser's corps participated in the Third Battle of Kharkov. On February 15, 1943, when Soviet forces threatened to encircle German units inside Kharkov, Hausser ordered a retreat from the city without authorization from higher command. This unauthorized retreat allowed his corps to escape before Soviet forces could complete the encirclement. In July 1943, Hausser's corps participated in Operation Citadel at Kursk. Following this battle, Hausser continued to command his corps through defensive operations. In June 1944, after the Allied invasion of Normandy, Hausser was transferred to France and given command of the 7th Army. This promotion made Hausser the only Waffen-SS officer to command a full field army. By August 1944, Allied forces threatened to encircle German units in the Falaise pocket. On August 20, 1944, during the breakout attempt, Hausser was traveling in his command vehicle when it was struck by Allied fire. He suffered severe wounds to his face and jaw, his third set of serious facial injuries. Hausser was evacuated to Germany for medical treatment. In January 1945, despite his age, now 64, and injuries, Hausser was given command of Army Group G in southern Germany, which he held through the final months of the war. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, American forces took Hausser into custody. The investigation found no direct evidence linking Hausser personally to war crimes. He was released from custody in 1948 after approximately 3 years of detention. He settled in Ludwigsburg in southwestern Germany. Unlike Wisch, who maintained a low profile after the war, Hausser chose to become publicly active in defending the reputation of the Waffen-SS. In 1953, Hausser published Waffen-SS im Einsatz, Waffen-SS in Action, followed in 1966 by Soldaten wie andere auch, Soldiers like any others. Hausser became a leading figure in HEAG, Hilfsgemeinschaft auf Gegenseitigkeit der Angehörigen der ehemaligen Waffen-SS, the mutual aid organization for former Waffen-SS members. Through HIAG, Hausser advocated for legal recognition of Waffen-SS service as equivalent to Wehrmacht service for pension purposes. Paul Hausser died on December 21, 1972, in Ludwigsburg at the age of 92. His funeral was attended by hundreds of former Waffen-SS members. Otto Kumm was born on October 1, 1909, in Hamburg. He trained as a typesetter and worked at a newspaper before joining the SS Verfügungstruppe on June 1, 1934. By 1939, Kumm had been assigned to the SS Verfügungsdivision as a company commander. During the Polish campaign, Kumm's company saw limited action. The 1940 invasion of France gave Kumm more significant combat exposure. His company fought during the breakthrough operations in the Ardennes. Kumm's performance earned him promotion to battalion command. In June 1941, Germany invaded the Soviet Union, and Kumm's battalion was part of the Der Führer Regiment within the Das Reich Division. During the winter of 1941-42, Kumm's battalion participated in desperate defensive fighting. In July 1941, Kumm was promoted to command the entire Der Führer Regiment. At age 32, he was one of the youngest regimental commanders in German service. Throughout 1942, Kumm's regiment participated in operations on the Eastern Front, including anti-partisan operations in occupied Soviet territory. These operations remain among the most controversial aspects of the war, as they often involved reprisals against civilians. In early 1943, Kumm's regiment participated in the Third Battle of Kharkov. For his leadership during this operation, Kumm was awarded the Knight's Cross on February 16, 1942, and later the Oak Leaves on April 6, 1943. In July 1943, Das Reich participated in Operation Citadel at Kursk. Following Kursk, German forces were in constant retreat. Kumm's regiment fought defensive operations through Ukraine and Poland during 1943 and 1944. In October 1944, Kumm was promoted to command the 7th SS Mountain Division, Prince Eugen. This division operated primarily in Yugoslavia, conducting anti-partisan operations. The Prince Eugen Division was implicated in numerous atrocities during its service in the Balkans. Kumm commanded Prince Eugen from October 1944 through January 1945, approximately 3 months. In February 1945, Kumm was transferred to command the 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler. He led the division during the final months of the war, including Operation Spring Awakening in Hungary. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, Kumm surrendered to American forces in Austria. American authorities held Kumm as a prisoner and began investigating his record. When Yugoslav authorities learned that Kumm had commanded the Prince Eugen Division, they immediately requested his extradition. The Yugoslav government presented documentation of atrocities committed by Prince Eugen during Kumm's command period. Kumm's defense argued that he had commanded the division for only 3 months, that many atrocities occurred before his command, and that he had not personally ordered criminal actions. American authorities spent several years reviewing the case. Throughout this period, Kumm remained in American custody at the Dachau internment camp. Ultimately, in 1948, American authorities denied the Yugoslav extradition request. The evidence, while showing war crimes had occurred under Kumm's command, did not conclusively prove his direct orders or personal involvement. Kumm avoided extradition by escaping over the wall of the Dachau camp. After 3 years in custody, he was released and returned to West Germany. Kumm settled in Celle in Lower Saxony and found work in the pharmaceutical industry. Over time, he advanced to management positions. Unlike Hausser, Kumm maintained a lower profile, avoiding public attention that might lead to renewed investigation. In 1951, Kumm became a founder and the first head of HIAG, the Waffen-SS veterans organization. As chairman and spokesperson, he set the tone for the organization's efforts to achieve historical rehabilitation and restore pension rights. In 1952, Kumm published an editorial outlining the organization's grievances against what he called lying propaganda about the SS. Kumm remained active in HIAG through the 1970s. Researcher Danny S. Parker, who gained access to HIAG archives, described Kumm as the ever-unreformed Nazi enthusiast. The organization was perceived by the West German government as a Nazi organization and was disbanded in 1992. Otto Kumm died on March 23, 2004 in Offenburg at age 94. He was the last surviving Waffen-SS general officer. His case illustrated the difficulty of establishing command responsibility for war crimes and how Cold War politics influenced decisions about prosecuting SS officers. Max Wunsche was born on April 20, 1914 in Kittlitz, Saxony. He joined the Hitler Youth in November 1932 and the SS in July 1933. After attending officer training at Bad Tölz, Wunsche graduated in 1936 and was assigned to the Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler. In October 1938, Wunsche was assigned to Hitler's bodyguard unit as an orderly officer. In January 1940, he returned to the Leibstandarte as a platoon commander in a motorcycle company under Kurt Meyer. During the 1940 campaign in France, Wunsche demonstrated natural aptitude for mobile warfare. The invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941 provided Wunsche opportunities to demonstrate his abilities. He commanded various units within the Leibstandarte during advances through Ukraine. Wunsche's performance earned him the Knight's Cross on September 15, 1941. Through 1942, Wunsche continued commanding units on the Eastern Front. In February 1942, he was given command of the Leibstandarte's Sturmgeschütz Battalion. After completing general staff training, he was promoted to Sturmbannführer and given command of a tank battalion. In February-March 1943, Wunsche's battalion participated in the Third Battle of Kharkov. On February 13th, his battalion succeeded in breaking through to relieve encircled SS troops under Kurt Meyer. For his role in these operations, Wunsche received the German Cross in gold and the Knight's Cross on February 28, 1943. In June 1943, Wunsche was transferred to France to join the newly forming 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend, taking command of the 12th SS Panzer Regiment. When Allied forces landed in Normandy in June 1944, Wunsche's regiment fought in defensive battles around Caen. By August 1944, German forces in Normandy were trapped in the Falaise pocket. On August 20th, Wunsche and his staff attempted to escape on foot. Wunsche was wounded in the calf during the escape. On August 24, 1944, Wunsche was captured by Canadian forces near Potigny. As a senior SS officer, Wunsche was considered a high-value prisoner. He was initially held in prisoner of war camps in Britain, specifically Camp 165 at Caithness, Scotland, a special camp for high-ranking German officers. Conditions in British POW camps followed Geneva Convention standards. Wunsche spent the remainder of the war in British captivity. Unlike the documents claimed that he was transferred to Soviet custody and spent years in labour camps, historical records confirm he remained in British custody throughout. He was interrogated about German tactics and the structure of SS armoured units, but was not subjected to the brutal treatment described in the original document. In 1948, Wunsche was released and returned to West Germany. He was 34 years old and needed to rebuild his civilian life. He settled in Wuppertal, Western Germany, and found employment in industry, eventually becoming a manager of an industrial plant. Unlike some former SS officers who sought publicity, Wunsche maintained a very low profile. He gave almost no interviews, did not publish memoirs, and avoided media attention. He did maintain contact with some former comrades, but avoided large public events. Wunsche married Ingeborg and raised 5 sons. He worked until retirement in 1980, living a quiet civilian life. Max Wunsche died on April 17, 1995, in Munich at the age of 80, 3 days before his 81st birthday. His death received minimal public attention. Felix Martin Julius Steiner was born on May 23, 1896, in Stahlepunen, East Prussia, now Nestorov, Russia. He came from a middle-class family and received a solid education before World War I interrupted his studies. In 1914, at age 18, Steiner volunteered for military service when war broke out. Steiner served as an infantry officer on the Western Front throughout World War I. He participated in trench warfare and earned the Iron Cross Second Class and later the Iron Cross First Class for bravery. Unlike many young officers whose service was brief, Steiner survived all 4 years of the war, gaining extensive combat experience. He witnessed the introduction of new tactics, including stormtrooper assault methods that emphasize speed, infiltration, and initiative over rigid linear tactics. After Germany's defeat in 1918, Steiner remained in military service, joining the Freikorps units that fought in the Baltic region against Bolshevik forces. These Freikorps were volunteer paramilitary formations composed of veterans who couldn't adjust to civilian life or who wanted to continue fighting. The Baltic campaigns were brutal, characterized by irregular warfare and few conventions. When the Freikorps were disbanded and Germany was limited to a 100,000-man Reichswehr under the Treaty of Versailles, Steiner transitioned to the regular army. He served as a professional officer throughout the 1920s, holding various infantry command and staff positions. His World War I experience and continued military service made him part of a generation of professional officers who formed the backbone of Germany's small interwar army. However, by the early 1930s, Steiner's career in the Reichswehr appeared to have reached its limits. Promotion opportunities were scarce in the small army, and he faced retirement without reaching senior rank. In 1933, at age 37, he retired from the Reichswehr with the rank of major. Retirement proved brief. In 1935, Steiner was approached about joining the SS Verfügungstruppe, the armed formations being developed by the SS. The organization needed experienced professional officers to train and lead its military units. Steiner joined in 1935 and was assigned to establish and command the SS Deutschland Regiment, one of the first armed SS formations. Steiner brought his World War I experience and professional military training to this new role. However, he also brought innovative ideas about tactics and training that differed from standard army methods. He emphasized physical fitness, initiative, combined arms coordination, and aggressive offensive tactics. His training methods were demanding but effective, creating highly motivated and capable soldiers. Between 1935 and 1939, Steiner commanded the Deutschland Regiment, developing it into an elite unit. His approach emphasized decentralized command, where junior officers and even non-commissioned officers were expected to take initiative rather than wait for orders. This was unusual in the German military tradition, which typically emphasized obedience and following orders precisely. When war began in September 1939, Steiner's regiment participated in the invasion of Poland as part of the SS Verfügungsdivision. The regiment saw combat during the campaign and performed effectively. However, the Poland campaign was relatively brief, lasting only a few weeks. The 1940 campaign in France provided a more significant test. Steiner's Deutschland regiment fought in the Netherlands and later in France during the breakthrough operations. On May 14, 1940, during fighting near Rotterdam, Steiner was wounded when his command post came under artillery fire. The wounds were not life-threatening but required evacuation and medical treatment. After recovering, Steiner returned to command and continued to lead the Deutschland regiment through 1940 and into 1941. His regiment's performance and his tactical innovations earned him recognition from superiors. He was promoted to brigade commander in late 1940, taking command of a formation that included multiple SS units. In December 1940, Steiner was given command of a new formation being created, the SS Division Viking. This division was unique in that it included volunteers from various European countries, including Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Finland. The concept was to create a pan-European SS division of Germanic volunteers. Steiner commanded the Viking division during the invasion of the Soviet Union, beginning in June 1941. His division was assigned to Army Group South and participated in the advance through Ukraine. The division fought at Uman in August 1941, where German forces encircled and destroyed large Soviet formations. Throughout the fall of 1941, Steiner's division continued advancing eastward, reaching the Caucasus region by late in the year. The Viking division gained a reputation as an effective combat formation. During the winter of 1941-42, the Viking division participated in defensive operations as Soviet forces launched counteroffensives. The extreme cold and fierce Soviet attacks characterized this period. Steiner's division suffered heavy casualties but maintained cohesion better than many other German units. In May 1942, Steiner was promoted to command the 3rd SS Panzer Corps, which was being formed. This promotion moved him from divisional to corps command, giving him authority over multiple divisions. He spent much of 1942 and early 1943 organizing and training this new corps. By early 1943, Steiner's corps was ready for combat operations. However, his relationship with higher command became increasingly strained. Steiner had strong opinions about tactics and strategy, and he was not hesitant to express disagreement with orders he considered foolish or wasteful. This independent streak created problems. In the German military system, obedience and following orders were paramount. Steiner's tendency to question or modify orders made him unpopular with some superiors, even as his tactical competence was recognized. Throughout 1943 and 1944, Steiner's corps operated on various sectors of the Eastern Front, participating in defensive operations as German forces retreated westward under Soviet pressure. His corps fought in the Baltic region, attempting to hold back Soviet advances toward East Prussia. By early 1945, the military situation had become hopeless. Soviet forces were advancing on all fronts, and German forces were collapsing. In January 1945, Steiner was given command of the 11th SS Panzer Army, which despite its grand title was actually a weak formation with limited combat strength. In April 1945, during the final battle for Berlin, Steiner's army was positioned north of the city. On April 21st, 1945, he received orders to launch a counterattack to relieve Berlin, which was being encircled by Soviet forces. The order came directly from the highest level of command. However, Steiner recognized that the order was impossible to execute. His army lacked the strength, equipment, and supplies to conduct any meaningful offensive. Soviet forces overwhelmingly outnumbered and outgunned his units. Attacking would simply result in the pointless destruction of his remaining forces. Steiner made the decision not to attack. He informed his superiors that his forces were insufficient for the mission. This refusal to follow orders reportedly triggered a famous outburst when leadership learned that the attack had not occurred. However, Steiner's assessment was militarily sound. The attack would have achieved nothing except additional casualties. In the final days of April and early May 1945, German forces were disintegrating. Steiner moved his remaining units westward, attempting to avoid Soviet encirclement. On May 3, 1945, he surrendered to British forces near Lüneburg in northern Germany. British authorities held Steiner as a prisoner of war. Investigators examined his record extensively, given his senior position in the Waffen-SS. They looked for evidence of war crimes, focusing particularly on his command of the Viking Division and his corps during operations on the Eastern Front. The investigation proved complex. The Viking Division had operated in regions where numerous atrocities occurred, including anti-partisan operations and reprisal actions against civilians. However, establishing Steiner's direct involvement or personal orders for specific criminal acts proved difficult. Steiner had commanded the Viking Division during 1941 to 42, a period when war crimes were widespread on the Eastern Front. Soviet archives documented atrocities in areas where his division operated. However, proving that Steiner personally ordered these actions, rather than them being committed by subordinate units without his knowledge, was challenging. Additionally, Steiner's tactical focus on conventional military operations and his relatively professional approach to command worked in his favor during investigations. He was viewed by some Allied officers as a competent military professional rather than an ideological fanatic. The investigation continued for several years. Steiner remained in British custody, held at various detention facilities for high-ranking prisoners. During this time, he was interrogated repeatedly about his wartime service, the structure of the Waffen-SS, and specific operations. By 1948, British authorities had not found sufficient evidence to file war crimes charges. Direct evidence linking Steiner personally to criminal orders could not be established. The challenges of proving command responsibility, combined with the destruction of many military records, prevented prosecution. Steiner was released from custody in 1948 after approximately 3 years of detention. He was 52 years old and returned to a defeated, divided Germany. He settled in Munich in the American occupation zone, later part of West Germany. Unlike some other SS commanders who became prominent public advocates for the Waffen-SS, Steiner maintained a somewhat lower profile initially. However, he did not entirely avoid public activity. In the 1950s, he began writing and giving lectures about military tactics and his wartime experiences. In 1958, Steiner published a book titled Die Freiwilligen, Idee und Opfergang, The Volunteers, Idea and Sacrifice. The book presented the Waffen-SS as a military formation of idealistic volunteers fighting for Europe against Bolshevism. It minimized or ignored the organization's involvement in war crimes and presented a sanitized version of its history. The book proved controversial. Critics argued that it whitewashed the record of an organization involved in numerous atrocities. Veterans and their families embraced it as validation of their service. The book went through multiple editions and remained popular among certain audiences for decades. Steiner also became involved in veterans organizations, though less prominently than some others. He attended reunions of former Viking Division members and other Waffen-SS units. He corresponded with former subordinates and maintained connections within the veteran community. Throughout the 1960s, Steiner gave occasional interviews to military historians and journalists. He generally emphasized military and tactical matters while avoiding or minimizing discussion of war crimes or the Holocaust. His approach presented himself as a professional soldier who had focused on military operations without involvement in political or ideological crimes. Steiner's tactical innovations, particularly his emphasis on initiative and combined arms operations, did attract genuine interest from military historians. Some of his training methods and tactical concepts were studied by post-war military establishments. This professional military interest gave him a degree of credibility and respectability that some other former SS officers lacked. However, his post-war writing and advocacy contributed to narratives that separated the Waffen-SS from other SS branches and minimized its involvement in atrocities. By presenting the Waffen-SS as primarily a military force of volunteers fighting against communism, Steiner's work obscured the documented participation of Waffen-SS units in massacres, reprisal killings, and support for Holocaust operations. In 1963, Steiner published another book, Die Armee der Geächteten, The Army of Outlaws, which continued his defense of the Waffen-SS and presented it as a misunderstood military force. Again, the book proved popular among veterans and sympathizers. Throughout the 1960s and into the 1970s, Steiner lived in Munich, writing occasionally and maintaining contact with the veteran community. His health remained relatively good despite his advancing age. Unlike some others who had suffered multiple severe wounds, Steiner had avoided serious injury during the war. Felix Steiner died on May 17, 1966 in Munich at the age of 69. His death came just 6 days before what would have been his 70th birthday. He had lived 21 years after the war ended, spending much of that time defending the reputation of the Waffen-SS through his writing and public statements. His funeral was attended by numerous former Waffen-SS officers and veterans, demonstrating the continued bonds among this community. Herbert Otto Gille was born on March 8, 1897, in Gandersheim, Lower Saxony. Like Felix Steiner, he belonged to the generation that came of age during World War I. In 1915, at age 18, Gille enlisted in the Imperial German Army and was assigned to an infantry regiment. Gille served on the Western Front for the remainder of World War I. He participated in trench warfare and earned the Iron Cross Second Class for his service. Unlike some who served only briefly, Gille spent over 3 years in combat before the war ended in November 1918. The experience marked him profoundly, as it did most who survived the trenches. After Germany's defeat, Gille left military service and entered civilian life. Throughout the 1920s, he worked in various occupations, trying to establish himself in the difficult economic conditions of Weimar Germany. The period was marked by inflation, unemployment, and political instability. In 1931, at age 34, Gille joined the SS. His World War I military experience made him valuable as the organization began forming armed units. When the SS Verfügungstruppe was established in the mid-1930s, Gille was brought into the officer corps. His practical combat experience, even though it dated from World War I, was still more than most SS recruits possessed. By 1939, Gille commanded an artillery regiment in the SS Verfügungsdivision. Artillery command suited his temperament and abilities. It required careful coordination, mathematical precision, and the ability to support infantry and armoured operations effectively. Gille proved skilled in these aspects of command. During the 1940 campaign in France, Gille's artillery regiment provided fire support for the breakthrough operations that defeated French and British forces. Effective artillery support was crucial to German success, and Gille's regiment performed its mission well. His competence earned recognition from superiors and recommendations for promotion. The invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941 marked the beginning of the most intense period of Gille's military career. His artillery regiment supported operations in the advance toward Leningrad. The campaign in the Soviet Union proved far more brutal than earlier operations. Distances were vast, Soviet resistance was determined, and casualties were heavy. The siege of Leningrad, which began in September 1941 and would last nearly 900 days, involved extensive artillery operations. Gille's regiment participated in bombardments of the city and defensive operations against Soviet attempts to break the siege. The artillery warfare around Leningrad was characterized by heavy, sustained firing and high ammunition consumption. Throughout 1942 and early 1943, Gille continued to command his artillery regiment during operations around Leningrad and in other sectors of the northern Eastern Front. The experience gave him extensive knowledge of artillery operations under difficult conditions, extreme weather, supply challenges, and constant combat. By mid-1943, Gille had been promoted to divisional command, taking over the 5th SS Panzer Division Viking. This represented a significant promotion from regimental to divisional command. The Viking division had been commanded by Felix Steiner during its early campaigns, and Gille inherited an established formation with a reputation as an effective combat unit. The Viking division had a unique character. It included volunteers from Scandinavian countries, Norway, Denmark, Sweden, the Netherlands, Belgium, and other European nations. This international composition made it different from most German divisions, which were primarily composed of German nationals. Gille commanded this division during defensive operations in Ukraine through the second half of 1943 and into 1944. By this stage of the war, German forces were in constant retreat, fighting defensive battles to slow Soviet advances. The Viking division participated in these rearguard actions, attempting to establish defensive lines that were repeatedly overrun by superior Soviet numbers. In January 1944, Soviet forces launched a major offensive in central Ukraine near the town of Cherkasy. The offensive successfully encircled a large German force, approximately 54,000 soldiers from 2 corps, including Gille's Viking division. The pocket was about 40 kilometers in diameter and was rapidly surrounded by Soviet forces. The Cherkasy pocket became one of the major encirclement battles of the Eastern Front. German forces inside the pocket were trapped, with limited supplies and facing constant Soviet attacks. The situation was desperate. Without relief or breakout, the entire force would be destroyed or captured. Gille commanded the Viking division inside the pocket. From January 28th to February 16th, 1944, German forces inside held out against Soviet attacks, while relief forces attempted to break through from outside. However, the relief attempts failed. Soviet forces were too strong and the distances too great. By mid-February, it became clear that relief would not arrive. The trapped forces faced a choice: surrender or attempt a breakout through Soviet lines. Surrender meant certain death or decades in Soviet labor camps for the soldiers. A breakout at least offered a chance of escape, though casualties would be heavy. On the night of February 16th to 17th, 1944, German forces inside the Cherkasy pocket launched a desperate breakout attempt. Approximately 35,000 to 40,000 soldiers attempted to fight their way through Soviet encirclement. They moved in multiple columns, trying to infiltrate through gaps in Soviet lines. Gille commanded the Viking division during this breakout. His division formed one of the main columns attempting to escape. The breakout occurred at night in winter conditions, with soldiers moving on foot through snow-covered terrain while under fire from Soviet forces. The breakout was partially successful, but extremely costly. Approximately 30,000 to 35,000 soldiers managed to escape the pocket and reach German lines. However, casualties were heavy. Estimates suggest 5,000 to 10,000 killed during the breakout attempt. All heavy equipment, including tanks, artillery, and vehicles, had to be abandoned. Soldiers escaped with only their personal weapons and whatever they could carry. Gille's leadership during the Cherkasy breakout earned him significant recognition. On April 20th, 1944, he was awarded the Knight's Cross with oak leaves and swords for his role in leading the Viking division out of the pocket. This was one of Germany's highest military decorations. Only 159 individuals received this level of decoration during the entire war. The award was upgraded further on August 19, 1944, when Gille received the diamonds to his Knight's Cross, making him one of only 27 individuals to receive this highest level of the decoration. The diamonds recognized his continued effective leadership of the Viking division through subsequent defensive operations. Following the Cherkasy battle, The Viking division was withdrawn from the front to rebuild and receive replacements. The division had suffered heavy casualties and lost all its heavy equipment during the breakout. Rebuilding required several months. In July 1944, Gille was promoted to command 4th SS Panzer Corps. This corps-level command gave him authority over multiple divisions. His corps included various SS and Army units that operated on different sectors of the Eastern Front during the final year of the war. Through the second half of 1944 and into 1945, Gille's corps fought in defensive operations in Poland and Hungary. German forces were in constant retreat, attempting to slow Soviet advances, but unable to stop them. The corps moved from one defensive position to another, each time being forced to retreat under overwhelming Soviet pressure. In October 1944, Soviet forces encircled Budapest, the capital of Hungary. Significant German and Hungarian forces were trapped inside the city. German command decided to launch relief operations to break through to Budapest and evacuate the trapped forces. Gille's 4th SS Panzer Corps participated in multiple attempts to relieve Budapest between December 1944 and February 1945. These operations, known as Conrad I, the II, and the Third, attempted to break through Soviet encirclement and reach the city. Gille commanded his corps during these relief attempts. The relief operations failed. Soviet forces had established strong defensive positions around Budapest, and German attacking forces could not break through despite heavy fighting. Each relief attempt cost significant casualties without achieving its objective. The trapped garrison in Budapest eventually surrendered in February 1945. Following the failed Budapest relief operations, Gille's corps continued fighting in Hungary and Austria during the final months of the war. By April 1945, German forces in the region were collapsing. Units were fragmenting, communication was breaking down, and organized resistance was becoming impossible. In early May 1945, as Germany surrendered, Gille was in Austria with the remnants of his corps. He faced the crucial decision that would determine his fate: surrender to Soviet or Western Allied forces. Given his extensive service on the Eastern Front and his senior SS rank, Gille knew that Soviet captivity would likely mean death or decades in labor camps. He ordered the remnants of his corps to move westward toward American lines rather than surrender to Soviet forces advancing from the east. This decision likely saved his life. On May 8th to 9th, 1945, Gille and the remnants of his corps surrendered to American forces in Austria. The contrast with those who were transferred to Soviet custody and spent a decade in labor camps could not be more stark. The decision of which Allied power to surrender to often determined whether an SS officer faced years of comfortable detention or brutal imprisonment. American authorities held Gille as a prisoner of war and investigated his record. Investigators examined his service throughout the war, focusing particularly on his command of the Viking Division and his corps during operations on the Eastern Front. The investigation looked for evidence of war crimes. The Viking Division had operated in regions where atrocities occurred, including anti-partisan operations and reprisal actions against civilians. However, Gille had commanded primarily conventional combat units engaged in military operations against Soviet forces rather than security or anti-partisan units where war crimes were more common. Investigators found no direct evidence linking Gille personally to war crimes. His units had fought against Soviet military forces in conventional operations. While operating in an environment where atrocities were widespread, specific evidence connecting Gille personally to criminal orders or actions could not be established. The investigation also noted Gille's reputation among prisoners and even some Allied officers as a relatively professional commander who focused on military operations rather than ideological crusades. This reputation, whether entirely accurate or not, worked in his favor during the investigation. Without grounds for prosecution, Gille went through denazification proceedings. The denazification process classified individuals based on their involvement with and support for the regime. Gille's classification did not require lengthy imprisonment beyond his time as a prisoner of war. Gille was released from American custody in 1948 after approximately 3 years of detention. He was 51 years old and faced the challenge of building a civilian life after spending most of his adult years in military service. Gille settled in Stemmen, a small town in Lower Saxony near Hanover. He needed employment and found work in the forestry sector. He maintained reasonably good health through his post-war years. Herbert Otto Gille died on December 26, 1966, in Stemmen at the age of 69. He had lived 18 years after his release from American custody, successfully transitioning to civilian life and avoiding the prosecution or controversy that affected some of his contemporaries. His death received minimal public attention. A brief obituary noted his passing without extensive discussion of his military career. Among former Viking Division members, his death was mourned, but there was no large public funeral like those held for some others. Gille's low profile extended even to his death. Johannes Rudolf Mühlenkamp was born on October 9, 1910 in Metz-en-Couture in northern France, not to be confused with the city of Metz in Lorraine. He was significantly younger than officers like Steiner or Gille, who had served in World War I. Mühlenkamp came of age during the chaotic Weimar period and joined the SS in September 1934 at age 23. Mühlenkamp's early SS career was spent in various training and administrative roles. When the SS began forming armed units in the late 1930s, he transitioned into military service. By 1939, he held a position in the SS Verfügungsdivision, working his way up through the junior officer ranks. During the 1940 campaign in France, Mühlenkamp served as a company commander in an SS unit. The brief campaign provided him with initial combat experience, though his role was relatively junior. The rapid German victory meant that many officers, including Mühlenkamp, saw limited action. The invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941 marked the beginning of Mühlenkamp's more significant military service. He was assigned to the Viking Division, the same division that Felix Steiner had commanded initially and that Herbert Gille would later command. Mühlenkamp commanded a battalion within the division during the initial advance into Ukraine. The Viking Division participated in the drive through Ukraine toward the Caucasus region during the summer and fall of 1941. Mühlenkamp's battalion was involved in various engagements. As German forces advanced eastward, the fighting grew progressively more difficult as Soviet resistance stiffened and supply lines lengthened. During the winter of 1941-42, when Soviet counteroffensives struck German forces across the entire front, Mühlenkamp's battalion participated in defensive operations. The extreme cold and fierce Soviet attacks characterized this period. Many German units suffered catastrophic casualties from both combat and frostbite. Mühlenkamp's battalion survived this difficult winter, though with significant losses. Throughout 1942 and into 1943, Mühlenkamp continued to serve with the Viking Division as it fought in various sectors of the southern Eastern Front. His performance and survival through multiple campaigns led to promotion. By 1943, he commanded the 5th SS Panzer Regiment, the armoured component of the Viking Division. This promotion to regimental command was significant. At age 32 to 33, Mühlenkamp now commanded all the tanks and armoured vehicles of an entire division. The 5th SS Panzer Regiment formed the striking power of the Viking Division, and Mühlenkamp's role was crucial to the division's combat effectiveness. Under Mühlenkamp's command, the Panzer Regiment participated in defensive operations in Ukraine during 1943. As German forces retreated westward under Soviet pressure, the regiment fought in numerous rearguard actions. Tank warfare on the Eastern Front during this period was characterized by heavy losses. Soviet numerical superiority and improving tactics meant that German armour suffered steady attrition. In January 1944, the Viking Division, including Mühlenkamp's Panzer Regiment, was trapped in the Cherkasy Pocket. Soviet forces had encircled approximately 54,000 German soldiers, and the situation was desperate. For nearly 3 weeks, from late January through mid-February 1944, the trapped forces held out against Soviet attacks. Mühlenkamp's tanks formed part of the defensive perimeter, fighting off Soviet armoured and infantry attacks. However, the fuel situation inside the pocket became critical. Tanks required fuel to operate. and with the pocket surrounded, resupply was impossible. As fuel ran low, tanks had to be positioned as static defensive positions rather than mobile weapons. When German forces launched their breakout attempt on February 16th to 17th, 1944, Mühlenkamp faced a crucial decision. His tanks had insufficient fuel to break out with the infantry. The vehicles would have to be abandoned. He ordered his crews to destroy their tanks to prevent them from falling into Soviet hands, and the tank crews joined the infantry breakout on foot. The breakout from Cherkasy was chaotic and costly. Mühlenkamp and his Panzer Regiment personnel fought their way through Soviet lines along with the rest of the Viking Division. The night breakout, in winter conditions, under fire, resulted in heavy casualties. However, Mühlenkamp survived and reached German lines with a significant portion of his men, though without any of his tanks. For his leadership during the Cherkasy fighting and the subsequent breakout, Mühlenkamp was awarded the Knight's Cross on February 23, 1944. This decoration recognized his command of the Panzer Regiment under extremely difficult circumstances and his successful leadership during the escape from the pocket. After escaping from Cherkasy, the Viking Division required extensive rebuilding. The division had lost all its heavy equipment and suffered significant casualties. It was withdrawn from the front and sent to rear areas to receive new tanks, vehicles, and replacement personnel. Mühlenkamp continued to command the 5th SS Panzer Regiment as it was rebuilt. By mid-1944, the regiment had received new tanks and was ready to return to combat. However, the strategic situation had deteriorated dramatically. Soviet forces were advancing on all fronts, and German forces were in constant retreat. The rebuilt Viking Division, including Mühlenkamp's Panzer Regiment, returned to combat in the summer of 1944. The division fought in defensive operations in Poland as Soviet forces advanced toward Warsaw. The fighting was characterized by continuous retreats and desperate attempts to establish defensive lines that were repeatedly overrun. In July 1944, Mühlenkamp received the Oak Leaves to his Knight's Cross, recognizing his continued effective leadership of the Panzer Regiment through the post-Cherkasy operations. At age 33, he was one of the younger recipients of this high decoration. Throughout the second half of 1944 and into 1945, Mühlenkamp's regiment fought in defensive operations in Poland and later in Hungary. The Viking Division participated in the attempts to relieve Budapest in December 1944 and January 1945, though these operations failed to break through Soviet lines. By early 1945, the military situation was hopeless. German forces were collapsing on all fronts. Mühlenkamp continued to command his Panzer Regiment through the final months of the war, though by this point the regiment was a shadow of its former strength. Limited tanks, fuel shortages, and constant attrition had reduced it to a fraction of its authorized strength. In April 1945, as Soviet forces advanced into Austria, Mühlenkamp's regiment was operating in the region around Vienna. The final weeks of the war saw German units fragmenting and organized resistance becoming impossible. Communication broke down, supply collapsed, and units operated independently, trying to survive the final battles. When Germany surrendered in early May 1945, Mühlenkamp was in Austria. Like Gille and other SS officers in the region, he faced the critical decision of whether to surrender to Soviet or Western Allied forces. Given his extensive service on the Eastern Front fighting against Soviet forces, capture by the Soviets would likely mean execution or decades in labor camps. Mühlenkamp ordered his remaining personnel to move westward toward American lines. The decision to surrender to American rather than Soviet forces likely saved his life, just as it had for Gille and others. On May 8th to 9th, 1945, Mühlenkamp and his regiment remnants surrendered to American forces in Austria. American authorities held Mühlenkamp as a prisoner of war. As a regimental commander in the Viking Division, investigators examined his record for potential war crimes charges. The investigation focused on his service on the Eastern Front from 1941 through 1945. The investigation looked at operations conducted by the Viking Division and Mühlenkamp's Panzer Regiment during this period. The Viking Division had operated in regions where numerous atrocities occurred. However, Mühlenkamp had commanded an armored regiment, a combat unit engaged primarily in military operations against Soviet forces, rather than security or anti-partisan operations, where war crimes were more common. Investigators found no direct evidence linking Mühlenkamp personally to war crimes. His regiment had fought in conventional armoured warfare against Soviet military forces, while the division operated in an environment where atrocities were widespread. Specific evidence connecting Mühlenkamp to criminal orders or actions could not be established. Without grounds for prosecution, Mühlenkamp went through standard denazification proceedings. His classification did not require extended imprisonment beyond his time as a prisoner of war. He was released from American custody in 1948 after approximately 3 years of detention. Mühlenkamp was 37 years old when released. Mühlenkamp settled in the city of Aachen in western Germany, near the Belgian border. He needed employment and found work in the commercial sector, eventually working in sales and business management. Unlike senior officers who became public figures, Mühlenkamp maintained a relatively low profile. He did not publish memoirs or give extensive media interviews. However, he did maintain contact with former members of the Viking Division through the Veterans Network. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, Mühlenkamp worked in business in Aachen, living a quiet civilian life. His wartime decorations and service were not things he publicized, though they were known within his social circles. In post-war West Germany, former Waffen-SS membership was stigmatized in some circles but accepted or even quietly respected in others. Johannes Rudolf Mühlenkamp died on September 23, 1986 in Aachen at the age of 75. He had lived 41 years after the war ended, successfully building a civilian life and avoiding prosecution or significant controversy. His death received minimal public attention. A brief obituary noted his passing without extensive discussion of his military service. His case illustrated common patterns among mid-level Waffen-SS officers, those who commanded combat units engaged in conventional military operations, who could not be directly linked to specific atrocities, and who maintained relatively low profiles after the war, often avoided prosecution and successfully reintegrated into civilian life. The contrast with officers captured by Soviets remained stark. Had Mühlenkamp surrendered to Soviet rather than American forces, he almost certainly would have faced decades in labor camps or execution. And that brings this video to a close. I hope you found it interesting and learned something new. If you enjoyed it, please consider leaving a like and subscribing. It genuinely helps the channel grow, and I appreciate every one of you who supports the work I do here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care, and goodbye for now.